Hello and welcome everyone to the Neurodiverse Teacher Podcast. Today, my guest is Dr. Marni Hill Foderaro. Dr. Marni Hill Foderaro is an award-winning and celebrated author, speaker, and educator. She earned her doctorate in education from Northern Illinois University and completed postdoctoral studies at Harvard during a very successful and rewarding 35-year career as a high school special education teacher with 12 years as a university graduate school adjunct professor. Marni is also the author of the critically acclaimed award-winning spiritual fiction, God Came to My Garage Sale. Marni also wrote a 5-book series entitled True Deceit, False Love, a creative approach offering information and tools for healing from family trauma. Well, welcome, Dr. Marni. I'm so excited to have you here today.
Well, thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
Excellent. Well, I'm going to jump right into things. And my first question for you is, tell me a little bit more about your career. How did you go from being a special education teacher to an award-winning author?
Well, I loved being a special education teacher, but I really had some other plans in my life. I wanted to travel, and I wanted to do some other kinds of projects. I didn't really realize that I would become an author. When I was close to retirement, I actually chose to leave a marriage, which was extremely traumatic for me. And it was after 27 years. And I
Wow.
realized that my values of honesty and goodness and fidelity and so many other things were just not the same values of who I was with. So, I pretty much lost everything, my home, my assets, my money, even lost 2 adult children to parental alienation, enough that would just, be extremely traumatic for anyone. But I was filled with happiness and gratitude. And, I knew I had a couple more years before I could retire from my wonderful career. But in the midst of this, I had to have a garage sale. And at that garage sale, I did have some spiritual experiences that, prompted me to research. I'm a lifelong learner. I wanted to learn about spiritual experiences and even near-death experiences because there were so many similarities to what I went through. And I ended up writing my first book, God Came to My Garage Sale. And even though it's a spiritual fiction, it's inspired by all true events. And it got the attention of James Redfield, who wrote the Celestine Prophecy. And he endorsed my book, which was just awesome. And then it went on to win a bunch of awards. It's obviously it's resonated with a lot of people. But, so I didn't plan on writing any other books after that. But after I retired from my career as a special education teacher, I was kind of left on my own, and I looked at it in some ways as an opportunity to start a new life, and kind of figured out that I wanted to move from the Chicago suburbs where I had lived a lifetime. And I actually moved out to the Caribbean, where I've lived the last 3 years. And
Wow.
yeah, absolutely love, being in the Virgin Islands and, surrounded by the ocean and in the rainforest. And, it was a wonderful place for me to heal and to just kind of start a new life after my career. And I ended up just in my healing journey researching, why do bad things happen to good people? Like, what was it that I went through? I didn't even really know what parental alienation was until I did a deep dive into the psychological research on it. I didn't know a lot about narcissistic abuse or all the different things that are related to domestic violence. And I needed to really try to figure out, what I went through, who I was dealing with, but I also needed to do a deep dive into my own intergenerational family trauma and figure out, what was my foundation? What were some patterns that made me an overgiver or a people pleaser or someone that just wouldn't have healthy boundaries. So in my research, I kept on coming across terminology that I knew I needed to look up and,
Mhm.
put the pieces of the puzzle together. And before I knew it, I had 100 terms and then 1,000 terms. And when the list grew to over 10,000 terms, I ended up thinking, okay, I'm going to put this in a book, because if this type of healing and research is helping me, it might help another person. And that is where I went ahead and wrote another book called True Deceit, False Love. And it's actually 15,555 terms and phrases on all this family trauma. But that led to kind of a neurodiverse way of healing where, instead of your traditional talk therapy, I wanted to do some sort of creative approach to try to deal with this trauma. And I knew that words had the power to hurt and words have the power to heal. So I did a lot of acrostic poetry and free verse poetry and a survivor's workbook, and using a multisensory approach to things. I even did a word search puzzle book. So that is the journey from going from a special ed teacher to now an author, moving from the Chicago suburbs to living a very happy and peaceful life in the Caribbean.
Wow. Wow. I'm trying to process all of that because that's really quite the journey, and I don't think I even realized to the extent in which your journey was, because it's almost like you had a whole new kind of rebirth essentially of who you were. It was like you kind of had an awakening almost to kind of who you are and what you feel and what you experience, and I think what you did is something that not a lot of people can do. It's very difficult. You're cutting ties, you're saying this is what's best for me and what I need to do. And then you picked up, and I mean, it's not like you moved to the next town over or anything. So I mean, wow, I think that's really quite an inspiring story. And it really shows that if you really kind of do the deep dive on the work of who you are, kind of how you can really reinvent your life. And so let me ask you, do you feel like prior to making that move to the Caribbean where you live now, do you feel like you did a lot of that work up front, or was that work that you did once, and I mean that personal growth type of work, that work that you did once you were already established in the Caribbean? Or is it something that you feel like is always happening?
I think it's a combination of, back when I was in the Chicago suburbs, as well as in the move in the Caribbean, because I still had, a few years left in my career
Mhm.
teaching. And I found myself, with basically homeless, with no money. But luckily, I still had my health and I had my job.
Mhm.
And, I just really was a survivor. I
Yeah.
really knew that, my outlook, my values, my integrity would see me through. And it was a wonderful bonus to just to have that spiritual component that was almost a gift to me when I was
Yeah.
going through some of the challenging times. And so, even though my circle got smaller and smaller and smaller, because when you go through domestic violence,
Mhm.
so much of what an abuser will do is isolate you from your support system of friends and family. And I found even the people in my neighborhood or the Girl Scout leaders that I had worked with for decades,
Mhm.
even people at church, not one person was there for me. And it was, I really had to rely on myself and then
Yeah.
on my faith, because I knew I was a good person. I Luckily, I did still feel very connected in my work setting.
Mhm.
I still was a very enthusiastic teacher, right up till the end. I know sometimes when people are near the end of a teaching career, they're getting kind of tired, and they might be a little worn out. I didn't find that at all. I looked at every single day as an opportunity to make a difference in a young person's life, and the kind of teacher that I was, it wasn't really about imparting content.
Mhm.
It was more about helping the students feel good about who they were and, embrace the strengths that they had and let them know that, we all have different learning challenges and it's not a negative. It can actually be a positive. And I thought, wow, what an opportunity to be able to teach at the high school level and have this chance to still make a difference in a young person's life just about their outcome and how they feel about themselves. And so I kind of turned that same kind of attitude towards myself of just, I've got to cut myself some slack, just like many other survivors or victims. I didn't really know what I was dealing with. I mean, it took me 27 years before I filed for divorce. And, I wouldn't say all that time was negative, but there certainly was a lot of intermittent reinforcement with the good mixed with the bad. And, so many red flags that I ignored.
Yeah.
But definitely, the healing happened, right away. I was in survival mode. That was the beginning of trying to figure out things. And luckily I did find that writing was very therapeutic for me. And I did have many versions of that first book, God Came to My Garage Sale. But the end result, I wanted to be extremely positive and focused more on the spiritual experiences. Even though it's a
Mhm.
fiction, it was inspired by real events. And so I kind of kept the trauma of it all out of it. But when I moved to the Caribbean and was doing that deep dive work into personality disorders and why I surrounded myself with people who are undiagnosed, but certainly seem to be on the cluster B spectrum, and
Mhm.
the narcissism, sociopath, psychopath. The labels don't mean so much as just the behaviors. And so that is when, I really had to do a lot of healing. And I kind of feel like now that I've done the 5-book series, and there's a 6th book in the series that's almost done, I'm kind of coming out the other side and ready to just focus my attention on some other things. I have other writing projects and activities and things I really want to focus on in the new year. So it's been a very healing journey, and I've found my voice. People have been interested in having me come on podcasts or speaking engagements just to talk about, a variety of these things with spirituality as well as family trauma, because, so many of us are going through all of these things, and having candid conversations really help give other people permission to explore those things for themselves.
100%. And I can see why people would want to hear from you. I mean, not only have you had this incredible journey, I mean, the fact that you're willing to speak out about it and the fact that I think you did some really brave things and some difficult things. So it makes sense to me why people definitely want to hear what you have to say. So let me ask you, obviously without giving away the book, because I want people to go and read it. Can you give me a little bit more insight to about God Came to My Garage Sale? I got that it's a fictional story, but it's based off true events. Could you maybe give me a little high level insight
Sure.
that of it? Because I really am intrigued and interested to know a little bit about what you experienced, since it sounds like that was kind of the spark that kind of set you on some of this inner journey work.
Really, it was. It was. And you know, I guess it kind of started when, I lost everything and I knew I had to have probably what would be my final garage sale.
Mhm.
But this time, not only was I just going to have to discard our family's, items, I was also kind of throwing away my hopes and dreams for the future. So there was a lot of emotion, happening here. And I really could have been negative and sad or angry, but I wasn't. I was just filled with gratitude, looking at the glass half full, not that, wow, I lost everything and now I have to do all this extra work, that on my own. I looked at it like, wow, I had the opportunity to raise my 2 beautiful children in this beautiful home, in this beautiful neighborhood. And, it's just all part of the journey. And
Mhm.
realize that, so many people have challenges in their lives, and so many people have significant losses, much bigger than what my losses are, even though my losses are significant. I just chose to handle it with love and compassion. So I was looking back at my home in this state of gratitude, and all of a sudden a dragonfly circled me, and then there were five, and then before I knew it, there were like 50 to 100 dragonflies circling me. And
Oh,
I was just in a state of awe. It was kind of like everything was slow motion, as if time stood still, but I could see every little detail. I could see the dragonflies flying down the block. I could see them come back. I could see the veins in the wings. I could see the iridescent colors and the different sizes that I equated with generations of ancestors, circling me with a hug, just letting me know I was loved and supported. And so that was just one of the first experiences I had. And about 3/4 of the way, through the whole experience, I started to come out of that, kind of back to reality. And I knew to pull out my cell phone and videotape, so I actually had proof. Yes, this happened to me.
mm-hmm.
I wasn't hallucinating. I wasn't imagining. My stress didn't get to me.
Mm-hmm.
I know I was only drinking lemonade at the time. So, no, no, no. So anyway, that just was one of many experiences that, there were specifically dated pennies and feathers and people and music that would come on that, like weren't that were songs that were related to a deceased loved one that had no relation to other music that was being played at this particular radio station. It was just out of context. And I just was taking all of this in. And there were so many experiences that I kept on asking myself, is God here? Did God come to my garage sale? And I didn't have I grew up atheist. I'm someone who always needed proof. I eventually became questioning, thinking that there had to be a divine source. And even though I'm currently not involved in organized religion, I definitely feel I'm a spiritual person. And I do believe God came to my garage sale. And so that actually, just like the teacher in me, I spent some time researching spiritual experiences and near-death encounters, and hearing from thousands of accounts, of people explaining what they went through, and there were so many similarities.
Wow.
And so that's what that book was all about. I was just compelled to write about all these different things. So basically, the story's about an atheist woman who has to have a garage sale and has miracles happen that make her really question the existence of God.
Wow. Wow. I mean, I feel like every example that they ever, if you ever look up, is my guardian angel trying to get a hold of me, or how do I know? Like, you hear feathers, you hear dates, it's like you had every experience
Oh,
that
yeah.
you could possibly have all at once.
Right, right. They were profound. It was, and I go into great detail in the book. Of course, like the settings in Indiana, but it's really in Illinois where I'm from. And it does kind of prompt you to go back in your life and think about what are some other times that you were close to death, or that, somehow it seemed like a miracle happened, or that something happened that you would just chalk up to a coincidence, but it might not be a coincidence. There might be some, divine intervention happening.
Wow. Wow. That's incredible. I mean, I think we all have, if you're a spiritual person, I like to think that I am, we all have those moments in time. And I can think of moments like that, but I feel like yours was incredibly powerful because of the intensity, and especially at the timing in your life. It really seemed like it came about at a time where you were really needing those types of messages. So that is incredible. So let me then transfer from God Came to My Garage Sale over to your other book series, The True Deceit, False Love. And you talked about how you have all these terminologies in there, and then you kind of used it as a way for healing. What can readers expect if they were to dive into that book?
Well, if they're interested in learning about family type traumas, whether it's domestic abuse, narcissism, parental alienation, which is just a devastating form of child abuse, and just so painful for any loving dad or mom that, unjustly loses a relationship with their children based on, just a false narrative. I mean, I when I was, in the throes of motherhood, which was to me the biggest and most joyous role I ever had, never in a million years would I ever think that one or even both of my children would fear me, would hate me, blame me, would cut off all relationship with me. And we're going on almost a decade of that. And so it is just mind boggling. The trauma is just so significant for the loving parent. And you can only imagine the trauma for the children. And lots of times when you hear about parental alienation, you hear about it with younger kids, and there's a divorce proceeding and one parent is lying and having that parent falsely arrested, and they're trying to get full custody and cut the other parent out. They would even go so far as to say the other parent died. And then some people actually go so far as to murder the other parent because they don't want, them to have a relationship with the kids, and they want this false narrative, put out there. So, so anyone who's might be looking into this, to my book series, True Deceit, False Love, is probably dealing with one or more of those, traumatic situations. And so what can they find? The first book, they can find kind of a resource manual of terminology, so many terms. And, purposely, I did not give definitions because there are many different definitions to various terms. And part of what I found as a researcher, as an educator, is that you have to do your own work in connecting the dots to make it meaningful. And so the first book, that they could look at that and read through, and it might explain some things to them, that it might prompt them to do a little bit more of their own research to figure out what they went through. And then, because I'm a lover of words, and I think that the words, the terminology really helps you understand what you've been through if you can name it, and you can look it up and hear other people's accounts. So the second book in the series is acrostic poetry, which I've really done my whole life. And I actually, as a special education teacher, I always did acrostic poetry with my students, where we would even put their name vertically, and then they would put, what they thought, things that they loved or that described who they were, and we would connect using the letters of their name. And so I would use this terminology like gaslighting, for example, and write that vertically, and then give some examples or an emotional response to it. And the way I did the poetry is not an autobiographical account by any means. It's more, from an abuser's point of view, a victim's point of view, a little kid, what they might, get from this, what a grandparent might experience, so there's acrostic poetry. And then I found, there were so many people that actually reached out and endorsed my book series in the abuse recovery community, very well-known researchers in the field, which I actually looked up to as mentors. And they turned around and said, Marni, what you are doing is something we've never seen before. This is like a real creative approach to healing from trauma. I want to support you. Here is my endorsement for your book.
Wow.
So that was really cool, even though I'm someone at this point, and I think I've always been someone that's more internally motivated. I don't need externals to, give me the reason for carrying on or to feel good about something. But I will say that the endorsement of so many people really did give me the validation that I was on the right track. But I did a survivor's workbook. So if someone really feels that, okay, I'm going through some of this stuff, I'm going to maybe try acrostic poetry to just kind of get the emotions out of my body and onto a page.
Mhm.
I have a survivor's workbook that's very, very easy to do, very simple, with uh, an example for every letter of the alphabet, with a couple suggested terms and places for them to create their own poetry. And that went on to free verse poetry. And then I have a word search puzzle book. And that out of the series actually became a bestseller, which just blew me away because it was a little surprising. I, you know, but that is again the terminology. So if you look at narcissistic abuse or something.
Mhm.
That could be, the title of this one word search puzzle. But then I list a lot of examples, and those are words that need to be looked up, and you get distracted a little bit while you're learning. You get to just do a calming therapeutic activity while you're still moving forward and trying to understand what you went through.
Wow.
So that's what they can expect when they, take a look at the 5-book series. And, all my books are on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. My publisher is Balboa Press, which is a division of Hay House. And Hay House books are all like spiritual self-help, Wayne Dyer, Louise Hay, a lot of just great authors there. And I'm just so honored to be part of, that whole group.
Wow, that is amazing. And let me ask you, so you spoke a lot about how you kind of embraced spirituality based off everything that you went through. But I'm curious, what advice would you give to listeners who might be going through some of the same things? So narcissistic abuse or parental alienation. What do you think they should know about trying to embrace spirituality, or what advice would you give them in trying to go through this?
Well, first of all, just in general, I would say, pay attention to red flags that are kind of in your face and that are common with abusers, with the isolation and the smear campaign and the money manipulation and the controlling and the gaslighting, which is just huge. Learn what gaslighting is because, intelligent, very capable people can be, brought down to believe that they don't have worth or they don't have abilities, even though they're successful in every other area in their life. But abusers can be very, very skilled in their tactics. So I would say, really learn about that. And there's a lot in the literature, or podcasts. Just look up some of these terminology and you can understand some examples and see if you are experiencing any of those things. And then with the spirituality part, everyone's at a different level in their journey on this. Some people, are devout atheists and would never
Mhm.
even think about spirituality. But, for me, it was really key because I was paying attention to signs and synchronicities that were giving me a reassurance that I was loved and supported, and that you know there's maybe a bigger picture going on here.
Wow.
Maybe it's um, maybe it's just not all about, oh, this just happened to me and this person's bad and this person's good. It could be that we're all on this journey called life. And, we're at different stages and we're interacting with one another. And, when I think of people that cause intentional harm to others, and, the high schoolers and junior high kids, even elementary kids can see bullies that are at school. And then as adults, we can experience bullies and or people that want to cause harm intentionally to people. And you have to realize they are very broken people themselves. If they need to put someone else down to make themselves feel better, there's something wrong there with
Yes.
their own makeup of who they are. And I think as an empathetic person, that has helped me understand my abuser and other people that, either through their silence, or their actions, aligned with a false narrative. And, where I was just kind of left, like trying to navigate this myself. And it helps me really to understand that maybe there's a bigger picture here. Now, that doesn't mean you continue being an overgiver and accepting of bad behavior and just say, okay, I'll give you the fifth chance here, just to find yourself, back in the abuse. You do
Mhm.
need to learn how to put up some healthy boundaries. And, I think that that's something, boy, I wish that was taught in the schools, for kids,
Yes.
because they would feel better about themselves if they didn't feel like they had to go along with everyone else's narrative, because it might not have good intentions for them. And we need to be strong in ourselves to be able to say, nope, that does not serve me, and that doesn't make me feel good, and that's nothing that I want to be involved in, and to step back. And it doesn't mean you're mean about it, or blaming others, or you're just sort of taking care of yourself.
You're learning how to set boundaries, which I think
Yeah.
oftentimes we don't teach youth or adolescents how to set those boundaries, and that's sometimes then, what makes people become people pleasers or become burnt out or those different things. So I think that's a very valid point. What you're saying is that it needs to be incorporated into the school setting. And it's one of those things, and maybe you can even kind of weigh in on this a little bit, because a lot of that conversation has been coming up more and more. There's a youth mental health crisis that's going on in our country, if not worldwide. But a lot of teachers, and I get it, I'm sure you've heard I call it the mass exodus of teachers that
Mhm.
have occurred. And I feel like a lot of teachers get frustrated because it's like, oh, that's one more thing I have to already add onto my plate. But do you feel like there's this happy medium that can occur where, yes, we are teaching children these skills, but we're doing it within our learning curriculums, and so that it doesn't have to feel like it's one more thing on top of everybody's plate?
Yeah, I don't look at anything like that as one more thing to do. In fact, I think that's like should be the priority, and some of the other learning will take place. I have to say education has probably changed a lot since I have left, even though I retired in 2019.
Mhm.
I saw even the last 10 years of my career, that things in education were changing, where they were going to more of a core curriculum, or they were basically telling teachers what they needed to teach and when to teach it and what time of day to teach it. And it was,
Yeah.
the freedom of being a teacher and being able to create some of your own units where you could incorporate a lot of these mental health things. I think, that was already kind of going by the wayside. So I was
Yeah.
thrilled that a large part of my career, I did have the flexibility to incorporate, all sorts of things into the classroom setting.
Mhm.
So yeah, I'm a big believer in just kind of, uh, you don't have it as a separate unit. It's just should be part of everything that you do. And we can bring up math even if we're teaching history. We can bring up English when we're teaching science. We can, and throughout all of teaching, boy, wouldn't it be nice if we could just bring up relationships and
Mhm.
communication with one another, and that could go across all different areas. So that's kind
100%.
of my thought on that. But like I said, education, at least in the school setting, has changed, I'm sure dramatically since I was there.
I think the biggest difference has been just the fact that you have such a significant teacher shortage, and because a lot of teachers, I don't know if this is, if you it sounds like you retired right before the pandemic, but it
Yes.
kind of the way I saw it was the pandemic occurred. You had a lot of teachers who, I think at first everyone felt really good, because you had all these parents saying things like, how do you guys do this? How do you put up with my kid all day? And teachers were finally feeling like, see, it's not as easy as everyone thinks. We appreciate it. And but then it was like, as the pandemic went on and people kind of felt like, okay, I'm ready for my life to go back to normal and I need my children out of my house. So get back to school, everybody. And teachers were like, whoa, I still am immune compromised, or I have people that I'm still taking care of, or I'm not comfortable being back in that situation. Then it's like everyone a lot, not everyone, but a lot of people kind of turned on educators and oh, you're hiding behind your unions, or you're lazy, or you're all this other stuff. And it wasn't that. Teachers like, I don't want to teach it virtually either. It's horrible, but like, just like you don't feel comfortable, I don't feel comfortable. And I felt like teachers just started to feel like it was like the straw that broke the camel's back for a lot of people.
Well, I actually just believe, there's so much to unpack with all of that. And that would definitely be a topic for another show.
Yes,
But
that's
probably
true.
not a
That is
show
true.
with me. Probably not a show with me, because really, I think that, the last few years, so much has been turned upside down, and little by little, we're starting to, um, discover that some things that we thought were true are really not true. And there's a lot of things to uncover. It's like, and it impacted education just like it did so many other areas. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, like I said, that's a whole
Oh,
nother
no,
thing to go
it could be
into.
a whole rabbit hole to go
Yes,
down. I
it,
think the point I wanted to make there, though, was just that I think teachers are the ones who are left just feel really stretched thin because there aren't a lot of resources there, and that's some of that challenge. Because I agree with you in the sense that we should be incorporating a lot of this into how we're teaching, but I can't help but feel like some of the people who are still who are left standing just are tired and feel exhausted and don't have some of the resources and supports. So it seems like any kind of ask is just, it's like we're playing Jenga at this point in time. And at any point, everything could come toppling down.
well, just to say, for me, it was just natural to incorporate. I was a teacher that was more about the students than I was about the content.
Mhm.
And the content, was delivered. They were taught the academic lessons that they needed,
Mhm.
to be able to advance to the next level or whatever. But I was more about the person and about, their learning challenges, and trying to develop strategies so that they could feel good about themselves, and become lifelong learners, and
Mhm.
love the whole concept of learning. So yeah, I couldn't even imagine how challenging things are today. But in getting back to what my focus is, I'm using some of the same philosophies that I have with, like this 5-book series of just
Mhm.
trying to look at a different way of approaching understanding things, because not everyone handles trauma, and having their life just turned upside down. There's not one uniform way to handle it. And I appreciate your kind words about my journey, and that I've been able to come out the other side. But it was very challenging, and it continues to be. It's really going to be a lifelong journey. At this point, my 2 adult children, with the child abuse that they've had to endure for a decade, there's irreversible damage to
Yeah.
relationships. And if I could try to encourage anything, it would be to seek out the truth, and follow your own heart and your gut feelings, and honesty really kind of prevails. At some point, just like we're seeing in the world, the truth is coming out with some things. And even in relationships, eventually, people, when they get older, they get wiser through their own experiences. And
Mhm.
it's just so devastating, though, for anyone to go through any of these kind of relationship
Yeah.
challenges. And but that's part of life.
Yeah.
But we can choose how we navigate this. I Instead of crawling under the covers and giving up, which isn't kind of how I operate, but I could see how that could happen to a lot of
Yeah.
people. I just chose to write, to embrace life, to explore the world, to find the good in things, and to speak honestly, to bring awareness, because I think our voices matter. We need to have some of these conversations, even if they are difficult. It's important to do that. But like I told you before, I'm also kind of shifting gears now too, and very excited for what the new year will bring, where I can focus on some other, projects and other writing as well.
Well, I love your eternal optimism. It is fantastic. So let me ask you, Dr. Marni, if people wanted to learn more about you, reach out to you, what would be the best way for them to do so?
The best way is just my website, which is www.godcametomygaragesale.com. And there you can find out about me and the people that endorsed me. In fact, if you are interested in any of these topics, look at the people who endorsed me, because they are resources within themselves. And then also on my website, in addition to me putting my speaking engagements or book signings or podcast interviews, TV interviews, I also highlight other people and what they are doing, to bring awareness to just a number of different things. But I think that we need to hear from a variety of perspectives. That's why podcasts like yours are just amazing, because, it provides not only, a place for resources, you can hear different perspectives on different issues. And I think the conversations matter.
I couldn't agree more. Well, before we go, I want to ask you a question that I ask all of my guests. So, and that question is, if you could give advice right now to youth or young adults who are either struggling academically or social emotionally, what advice would you give them?
Well, I would say to them, first of all, you're not alone, because a lot of people are feeling this. Even if you come across classmates and peers that appear to have it all together, they don't. All of us are going through challenges. It may look different for different people. Realize that you are a beautiful human being just the way you are. And, celebrate who you are and your strengths, and even your challenges could also be, you know, part of who you are, and that's okay. Just realize that you have the power within you to choose how you want to respond to how you're feeling, or how other people might try to make you feel. You have the power within you to say, you know what? I love myself and I'm going to be okay. And, find your passions, find what makes you click. Don't rely on external validation, thinking that, oh, okay, only if this person will accept me, or I have to do this because, society says this is the only way to go, that I can make it in the world. Nope. Give yourself some credit and follow some of your own gut intuition feelings. But, you can rise above anything with a positive mindset.
I love that. That couldn't be better advice. Dr. Marni, I want to thank you so much for coming on the Neurodiverse Teacher podcast today. I'm grateful to have you, to hear your story, and for that wonderful advice. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much. And it was just an honor to be here and have this conversation with you.
Well, thank you. And thank you to my listeners for tuning in. And I look forward to seeing you next week on the Neurodiverse Teacher podcast.